Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. For those of you I don't know, I'm Jeremy Snyder. I'm the Managing Director of the High Impact Philanthropy team here at Mercy Corps, and I'm joined by Craig Redmond, and I'll introduce him here in a minute. Really want to take a minute to say thank you to all of you for taking the time this morning to join us and for being partners with Mercy Corps, both for the long term and the immediacy and the future. As we've looked to figure out what pivoting in the face of COVID means, we've recognized the tremendous support that it's going to require and has required, and so many of you have stepped up in just a remarkable way. We've got some just incredible corporate partners joining us today that have gone hand in hand with us trying to figure out how to tackle this, not tackle COVID, but how to continue to deliver our services, our programming in the face of this. Remarkable individuals here. As many of you know, last month we launched our COVID resilience fund in order to try and really determine what it was going to take to pivot our programming so that Mercy Corps can continue to deliver life-saving aid and help economies thrive. And kind of our best ballpark estimate at the time was it was going to take about $25 million to pivot our work to respond to this. And we're a few weeks out and we're almost halfway to that goal of raising that. And just, I want to say thank you to so many of you who have stepped up. The other thing that's been incredibly inspiring, and so many of us draw our inspiration from our partners that refuse to let the world slip away in this, is we've seen a number of people, and I know there's some on the call right now, so I want to take them into call, that have said, we wish we could do more. Right now, what can we do? And have opted to leave Mercy Corps in their estate plans to make sure that we have the resources indefinitely going forward. And that's such a remarkable legacy to leave. And so I wanted to take a minute to say thank you for those of you who have done that. As COVID continues to spread around the world, it's now reached nearly every country that Mercy Corps is working in, affecting the most vulnerable people, affecting their health, economic impacts, and affecting every way of life for those who are facing already severe situations. The virus starting already fragile markets, food security, healthcare systems, and Mercy Corps is working around the clock to protect the health and safety of our teams and the communities we serve to ensure the ongoing delivery of the programs to more than 28 million people in the US and around the world. It's a challenging time, but Mercy Corps is uniquely positioned to help. Operational in more than 40 countries, we're experts in working in high-risk environments, including countries facing infectious disease outbreaks. While COVID's new, these scenarios aren't new to us. We've been in this with Ebola and cholera and just things that act in the similar ways in the way that they impact countries. And we really are positioned to respond in a way that very few people are around the world. And to help us better understand this unprecedented situation, I'm really happy to have Craig joining us here. Craig's our Senior Vice President of Programs at Mercy Corps. He oversees all of our programs globally. There's nothing that happens that he doesn't have his hand in here, and so it's really exciting to have him here and hear his perspective. I want to say a few words about Craig before I hand it over to him. He's currently based in Portland at our headquarters, but has lived in many, many countries and is over 20 years at Mercy Corps. That's an incredible time to spend with one mission, one agency. So his stories and what he sees really does come with a whole breadth of experience and expertise. Before serving as the Senior Vice President of Program, Craig was Regional Program Director for South and Southeast Asia and Country Director for various places across those regions throughout his time. His work has covered sectors including water and sanitation, health and hygiene, food security, energy, emergency response, which are many of the things that we're having to pivot around with COVID. So we couldn't be better positioned to have him at the helm of our programs. Today, we've asked Craig to provide some insight into the COVID-19 global pandemic, including the challenges our teams on the ground are facing, how we pivot programming to combat the virus, and how we're moving forward in the face of the unknown. Craig's going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you're joining via video chat, the Q&A icon at the bottom is open and live now. Please submit your questions there, and I'll work through them when we get to that portion. Feel free to start submitting questions as Craig is speaking. And we'll go from there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig, and we'll be back. I'll be back here in a bit for questions. Thanks, Craig.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you so much, everybody. I just want to join Jeremy in thanking you all for your tremendous support. We couldn't do what we do without you, so thank you so much. It's really great to have this opportunity to talk to you all. So here's what I wanted to do this morning and this afternoon for some of you. What I want to do is kind of give you a brief situation report, and that sit rep will kind of be general, because obviously there's a lot we could say and I could spend hours doing that, but I kind of want to give you a sense of some dynamics at play here, and then I'll go into our response to COVID itself, so you get a sense of how we're looking at it. And then I'll talk you very quickly through our strategy around COVID as well, our global strategy. And then I want to give you a few examples of activities that are happening in each one of our 4 regions around the world. So you got to get a little feel for what's happening, what's not happening, and why. And then after that, I wanted to share with you some things that keep me up at night, which is a lot. And I'm sure it's the same for all of you. I've been reading about this famous dynamic where people are just not sleeping well. And I am one of those people. So things that keep me up at night, and then also what I'm excited about, and which is also a lot. Maybe that's why I can't sleep. And then at the end, as Jeremy said, I'd love to hear questions, comments, thoughts. It's really valuable for us to get a sense of what you're thinking about, any questions you have. So let's jump in. As Jeremy said, I've been with Mercy Corps for a long time, and that wasn't the plan, but it has just stayed interesting, and I've never done the same job twice, and it's just been so dynamic, and I've been lucky enough to work all over the world. I was with the United Nations before Mercy Corps. I was with UNHCR working on refugee issues in Central Asia, and after that I did microfinance work with UNDP for a number of years. That's where I met Mercy Corps, and so I've worked in Central Asia for a long time. I've worked in the Caucasus, I've worked in East and West Africa, and I've worked in Southeast Asia. And now with this job, I've now been exposed to Mercy Corps programs everywhere in the world. So it's been great. It's been a hell of a ride. Just to give you a little sense of sort of where I come from. Well, let's jump in here for a quick sit rep. It's not an over exaggeration to say that COVID has been devastating for the Mercy Corps world, for the places where we work. Generally, the way we're designed is that we have our programs. We're in about 40 countries, 42 countries around the world. Each one of those country programs has strategies designed to address the challenging issues in that place. And some of them are terribly challenging, as you know, crises and wars and famines and all those kinds of things, and rapid onset emergencies like earthquakes and tsunamis and so forth. And then on top of that, we also have an emergency response team, a global one. And they're designed basically to be able to respond to roughly 4 global emergencies at one time. Usually in the world, there are 2 or 3 level 3 global emergencies. Those are really, really serious ones, like Syria, things like that. This is the first time since I've done this where you can say you have a global emergency happening almost everywhere in the world at the same time. It's unprecedented for all of us who do this work, and I know for all of you out there listening as well. So just to put that in context to everything else we say, this is big. This is big for everybody in the world, and I know, obviously, we all know that. We are starting to see in some places in the world a slight easing of restrictions, like here in North America, where there's some talk of that. We're starting to see that in a few other places as well. For example, in the Middle East, in Lebanon and Jordan, you're starting to ease some restrictions around movement for families, some markets beginning to open up, things like that, which is good and bad. Obviously, on the good side, hopefully it starts to stimulate a little bit of economic recovery. On the bad side, we all worried that it can accelerate the spread of the virus, which is very possible. In the world where we work, in most countries where we're working, we're seeing a substantial delay in the wave of the numbers of cases coming. And that's for a few different reasons. In some cases, it's just because it just hasn't, like in some places in Africa, it just hasn't gotten there yet. There isn't anybody who doesn't think it won't, so it's coming. In some countries, like Yemen, for example, there's underreporting because there isn't a centralized ministry of health that's responsible for doing that. In other places, I'll use Syria as an example, where we've seen cases, our team has reported seeing cases of armed groups from the government of Syria going into hospitals and with guns telling doctors, you will not report any cases, because they don't want to send the message that the government doesn't have it under control. So that kind of accounts for some of the smaller numbers you're seeing in some places. As Jeremy said, as of this morning, every single Mercy Corps program in the world, those 42 countries, is now reporting cases of COVID-19. Tajikistan was the last one, and obviously they've had it for a long time. They just weren't reporting it yet, and now it's come out. On the heels of some of the easing of those restrictions, we're seeing a corresponding rise in some social unease. A lot of the violence that we've seen in the streets of people protesting the economic situation in Lebanon, those have started again as restrictions begin to ease, and we can expect to see some of that, particularly around some of the economic hardships that that people are facing as a result of those restrictions. So that's something that's coming up as well. And then the other dynamic that is affecting us pretty dramatically is the slow response from our government donors. And in this case, I'm talking about USAID and DFID in the UK. These are our two largest government donors. And in emergency cases, oftentimes those are the ones that we look to for, those big rapid sort of funding streams that allow us to respond quickly. Frankly speaking, both of those are extremely slow. We have not seen the funding that we would have expected at this point in time, and we're worried about that. We're certainly in conversations with response to COVID. And I broke this down into 4 pieces to kind of give you a feel for how we're looking at this. The first thing we did was to look at health and well-being guidelines and develop them for our own teams internally and for the communities we serve. We want to make sure first and foremost that we're doing no harm and that we're taking care of our teams. So we put together policies and we put together live streams like this one, where we have conversations with our global teams about how to take care of themselves and how to take care of the communities that we're serving, so that we don't make people sicker. So that was an important thing that came out very quickly. We had that in development in February, and that came out several weeks ago. So that was an important piece. The second one is looking at this question of business continuity. Obviously, in a time like this, you have to sort of analyze the risk to the organization so that we can make sure that we continue. We had each of our field teams look at their staffing structures, what people were going to have to be quarantined, what people were going to be able to continue to work, and sort of weigh that. And then we had to have a hard look at our finances to see, do we have the liquidity to make it through this emergency? And those guidances came out to the team also right away. That's really an important one, to make sure that we're healthy throughout this emergency. So that was an important thing. That was the second important thing that we did. And then we had a hard look at program continuity. And I mean this in 2 ways. Number one, for each of those country programs, believe it or not, in Mercy Corps, we have, in those 42 countries, collectively, we have about 600 grants globally. That's a lot. That's a lot of grants happening at any one time. And we went through a process, believe it or not, where we looked at every one of those. And we said, which of these can we continue? Which of these do we need to pause? Which ones can we pivot and change the objectives and have a build in a COVID focus to those programs? And we did that process for every one of those grants and every one of those country programs. And that took us a couple of weeks, but we did it. And so that was an important part as well, just to get a sense of where are we, how are we contributing, how can we be truly relevant to the scale of this problem? And that was an important one. And then finally, the fourth piece was we developed an agency-wide global COVID strategy. And we did this because, for lots of reasons, obviously strategies are important for any business or for any organization. And for Mercy Corps as well, we wanted to say, with respect to this global emergency, what do we stand for? Where can we be great? Where can we contribute? Where do we think we have more to add? And how do we play to our strengths? Because this is big, and there are a lot of organizations who do great work. How can we partner appropriately with private sector, with others in our sector, and with government, so that we can really get this done? And our strategy broke into 4 main pieces. Let me quickly talk you through that, because it's pretty interesting, and it gives you a window into sort of how we see this emergency, but also what we think we're good at. The first piece of that global strategy is looking at this question of humanitarian analysis. Mercy Corps is, some of you probably know, Mercy Corps is pretty famous for being, I don't mind saying, being one of the smarter organizations out there, because we have this deep humanitarian analysis that we do. We've built out these humanitarian analysis hubs. The famous one we have in Syria, which has been around for about 7 years, is called the HAT, Humanitarian Analysis Team. And they do deep analysis on the dynamics at play inside Syria. And they do that through a series of analysis through personal relationships. They literally call people, they say, what's happening there? What do you think is going to happen? And we put out papers to donors and others in our community about trends that we see happening. And we talk to donors, and we talk to others in our space about where we should be putting our time and energy and efforts. So we have one of these analysis hubs in Syria. We have another one in Yemen. We have another one in North Africa. We have another one in the Sahel. We have one in Nigeria. And we have another one in Colombia, that serves Colombia, Venezuela. And we're pivoting these, or expanding these hubs, so that they are doing deep analysis on COVID and the impact of COVID. And the impact geopolitically, the impact economically, at the household level, all of that. We firmly believe anytime there's a complex emergency like this one, the smartest organizations are going to be the ones that contribute the greatest. And so that's an important piece for us. So that point number 1 in the strategies is humanitarian analysis. Point number 2 is the concept of resilient households. So what will it take, and how can we contribute to help the households we serve be more resilient? And that breaks that into 2 fundamental pieces. One, food security. We've all been reading about the challenges and the concerns around food security in the context of the COVID crisis. Smallholder farmers around the world will be hit disproportionately in this. Productivity is expected to drop. Transportation is a huge issue. Other things are very much in question with respect to food security. It's a huge concern of ours and many other organizations and governments as well. Food security, and the other part of it is livelihood. So what we'll do there is we'll look at markets, and we'll look at cash, the use of cash. As many of you know, Mercy Corps focuses in many places on responsible use of cash programming. That means getting cash into the hands of households so that they can spend as they think is most important for their needs. And that has a wonderful effect on both the household itself and the local marketplace as well. So philosophically, we're very much in that. And then we also use that cash transfer work to look at the larger question of financial inclusion. How can we use that as a vehicle to get more households into a formal financial inclusion, like banking or access to capital or those kinds of things? So that household resilience question is a big one for us. And then the second piece of that is the obvious water, sanitation, and hygiene and behavior change around that. In so many places in the world, we have access to so many community members, millions and millions of people who need more information about the basics around washing your hands, appropriate use of latrines, those kinds of things. We're continuing, in fact, expanding our work around water, sanitation, and hygiene and behavior change as an important piece of addressing the crisis as well. So that's resilient households. The counterpart to that one is resilient markets. As all of you know, Mercy Corps is a real believer in the power of the marketplace. We believe that We take a systems approach to looking at that. We believe that markets are essential to gains and improvements in any other sector. If you make gains in health and hygiene, but you don't address the marketplace, you don't address the household economies, you will lose those gains. So making sure that markets are healthy, and where there are dysfunction or disruptions in those marketplaces, we see what we can do to facilitate positive change there. So that whole idea of resilient markets is important to us. We're kind of famous for this markets in crisis approach that we use. No matter where you are in the world, whether it be in the middle of Idlib or whether it be in Central African Republic, in Bangui, there's always a marketplace, even in wartime. How can that marketplace work better to serve the people we serve? That's a question that we ask ourselves. And so this markets in crisis approach is very important to us. And then finally, the last piece of our strategy is this idea of access to reliable information. Whenever there's a complex crisis like this one of the first things that happens is that disinformation begins to flow. People don't have access to the right information, and so stories begin to proliferate about what is happening, what the government's going to do next, where is there or where is there not access to resources, and so forth. I'll give you an example. In the refugee crisis that happened a couple of years ago, where refugees from Syria and other parts of the world as well were going into boats and crossing the sea and losing their lives, and those who made it there, it created a huge refugee crisis in the world. Mercy Corps put together what we called Signpost, which was basically a place where using their mobile device, refugees could go online and get access to reliable, real information about what was happening, where they could go for resources, and so forth. We've started that again for COVID, and we're using that and other types of information, and I'll get to some of that when I tell you a couple of stories, as a way of addressing the dearth of reliable sources of information about what's really happening. So that's an important role that Mercy Corps plays in the context of COVID. So that's the 4-part strategy. I know that's kind of dense, but I wanted to share that with you to give you a little bit of feel for what we're doing, and you'll see that play out when I describe some of the activities, which I will do now. Let's start in Africa. In Kenya, a couple of years ago, not more than a couple now, probably 5 years ago or so, Mercy Corps did a big program called Yes Youth Can. And what that program did was it engaged, they're called youth bunges. And what they are is youth associations, village level youth associations. And we did thousands of them. We helped structure with the government thousands of those bunges around Kenya. Well, we're reactivating those bunges so that young people can get out there and be positive messengers for health, for economic, for other opportunities around COVID, and how communities can respond to those. In addition, there are several of those bunges now that have started radio programs, and those radio programs are designed to get information out to as many people as possible. We love this for so many reasons. One, it makes use of the kind of technology that rural Kenyans use. Often the radio is oftentimes their greatest source of information. And 2, it engages young people, which is such an important thing to do globally, increasingly, given the demographics in so many of the countries where we work. Africa is a very, very young place. So engaging young people is a powerful thing to do. The other one I wanted to tell you about in Africa was our program, AgriFin. AgriFin is a program that's based in Kenya, but also has worked in Zambia and also Tanzania. And it's focused on addressing the needs of smallholder farmers by bundling services on a mobile device. We've partnered with Safaricom there, the biggest provider of internet and cellular, and we had developed a series of products and partnered with other organizations to create this bundled package of services for smallholder farmers. Obviously, that's a natural application of getting information out there around COVID to people who need it most. So we've leveraged that platform, that technology platform, in the case of Kenya, Tanzania, and to get information out there to as many people using a trusted platform that they already use for their businesses. So that's another example of something that we have going in Africa. Next, let me tell you a couple of examples from the Middle East. In Yemen, very tough place. Mercy Corps has a food security program going on there, and it's in Taiz. Taiz is the city that is on that fracture line between North and South Yemen. It's right there on that line. Mercy Corps is serving about 32,500 households there with food vouchers, and the vouchers allows them to get a voucher and then go purchase food from where they want with that voucher. And it's a powerful way to both give the families, as I mentioned before, the power to determine their own outcome and what they need, but also stimulate the marketplace at the same time. We're using that same mechanism and that same distribution platform to get out basic COVID messaging to those households. And as you know, the conflict in Yemen is alive and well and very kinetic. And in the north, we're having lots of issues with government there, and in the south, government is not even very functional. So having something like this, a trusted source of information, while we're using a mechanism that they trust and rely on, is an important thing to do. So that's Yemen. In Jordan, we're using our network of, I think some of you know about Micro Mentor. Micro Mentor is a matching platform between micro small businesses and mentors. It's a digital platform that connects people, business people, with mentors, and those are obviously often business people themselves who have had some success and want to share, and they connect. And we have that in English, we have that in Arabic, we have that in French, and we have that in Spanish. In Jordan, Micro Mentor is playing an important role in addressing the needs of micro and small businesses around COVID-19. So as we're seeing in North America and in Europe and all over the world, small businesses are struggling. And so to have a mentor for some of those people, for some of those businesses, somebody to talk to ask questions, to help them navigate these challenging waters is really powerful. So that's one of the things that we're doing in Jordan. And that platform is called Micro Mentor. And we've had Micro Mentor at Mercy Corps for many years, 10 plus years. So, and now it's expanded into the Arabic speaking world, which is exciting. Asia. In Kyrgyzstan, a country where we've been for 25 years, Mercy Corps has a nationwide school feeding program that focuses on nutritional issues of school-aged children, as well as the behavior change necessary around nutritional status for school-aged children. We're using that same nationwide platform to talk about COVID, hygiene, sterilization issues, and so forth, not only for school feeding, but for household as well. And we've learned over the years that kids are a wonderful way to get messages into the households and to spread the news about the importance of acting certain ways around something as critical as this virus. So we're using that nationwide platform. We're in hundreds and hundreds of schools across the country, and we're using that now to address COVID. And then the last example I have for Asia is in Afghanistan. I know many of you have been tracking the situation there. We've seen over the last month or so, a bit more than 100,000 refugees have poured over the border from Iran into Afghanistan for a couple of reasons. One, the COVID crisis in Iran, as you know, is very serious. So some of them were escaping that. And second, in Iran, a lot of those refugees were not welcome anymore. So they were pushed back over the border, more than 100,000 of them. Many of them ended up in Herat, one of the countries close to the border there in Afghanistan, on the border of Afghanistan and Iran. Mercy Corps has a new program there that's focusing on promotion of healthy behaviors around COVID, as that in Afghanistan is the kind of the center of the pandemic. That's going to be very, very serious as we go forward. It's a country to watch. Denser populations in cities like Herat, obviously in Kabul, and a handful of ventilators, for example, and just not enough healthcare. So that's a very worrying place. So that's Asia. And finally, a couple of examples from the Americas. In Haiti, Mercy Corps has had a program for a long time, and we have used a network of youth, again, young people, giving young people life skills, giving young people early business skills so that they can have success in the marketplace and so forth. We've re-engaged, like we did in Kenya, we've re-engaged with those young people to help spread health messages out into their communities. Haiti is another densely populated country that we're very worried about and tracking closely. And then finally, the last example was right here in the Northwest, Mercy Corps Northwest, our very own organization that focuses on micro and small businesses and helping business people get started. Often these are mostly underrepresented populations, people who get out of prison, people like that who want to start a business. They can get business training from Mercy Corps, and they can sometimes get access to capital as well through loans. Mercy Corps is partnering with the government here in the state of Oregon and the state of Washington, and we're helping to identify struggling micro and small businesses, and we're giving them grants as well as online business training to help them make it through this crisis. So that's happening right here in the northwestern part of the US. So that's a very quick roundup of a set of activities that are happening in the Mercy Corps world. All right, finally, let's get to what keeps me up at night and what I'm excited about. Among the things that keep me up at night, this is not a comprehensive list, but just a couple of examples. Obviously, first and foremost, the safety of our teams. There are so many of them who are in harm's way, who we know, for example, in a place like northwest Syria. Our team there has, around Idlib, our team there has been displaced. Our office has been displaced 4 times because the war keeps chasing them out, and then they reestablish, and then they keep going north. And now you have COVID on top of that. I worry so much about our teams in those places where we know that they're going to be in harm's way, and we know there is not adequate health care. So how do we take care of those teams, and how do we make sure we're watching out for each other? That really worries me. I also am very concerned about COVID as an excuse for the expansion of repressive regimes. We've seen clear examples of this already, where they're using, governments are using the clampdown of the COVID crisis to exert influence in other ways. And I worry about that kind of strongman approach happening more regularly across the globe. In so many places where we work, this is a very real threat and something to watch as well. I worry about the doubling and tripling of complexity of this crisis. Pre-COVID, there was still a lot to be concerned about. We had conflict happening in so many places, extreme poverty happening in so many places, lots of other things. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm thinking about, the combination of conflict like in Democratic Republic of Congo on the eastern side of the country, worried about the ongoing conflict there. And then you lay Ebola on top of that. And just as the Ebola numbers go down, you have COVID on top of that. So the doubling and tripling of those kinds of complexities are just almost unimaginable for the communities who are in those places. We've all been reading about the fact that we're seeing the largest number of locusts in East Africa than we've seen in decades and decades. So you have locusts who are affecting crop production in East Africa, and then on top of that you have COVID, which is affecting everything. Distribution, farmers' ability to access markets, on and on. So that's another one. And then a place like here in the Americas, the Caribbean storm season is on its way. We have a couple of bad storms like we had last year, like in the Bahamas, and then you have COVID as an overlay on top of that. So the complexity of those things as they double and triple up is something that keeps me awake. And then related to that, just the massive food insecurity that is very possible in Africa, particularly in Africa, is something that's greatly worrying all of us at Mercy Corps, but most organizations who are doing this kind of work. So I wanted to end on a high note. There's a lot to be excited about as well, and I'll share a few of those things with you as well. One of the main ones is the speed and the spirit with which this Mercy Corps team has responded to this crisis. I as I said, I've been here 20 years. We've been through a lot of crises together. I've just never seen anything like it. Just the ability of the team to pick up, put strategy forward, stay upbeat, stay focused, keep working really hard on this issue. I'm so impressed and honored to be here with this powerful team. And I don't say that because I have the position I have. I say that because, you know, we've all seen a lot of teams in action. This is one of the greats. So I couldn't be more proud of that and excited about that. I also am really interested in what we're calling internally as this digital awakening. We probably didn't invent that. Probably we've been talking about that for some time. But the digital awakening that is happening and that is so necessary in this context. Everybody's comfortable using Zoom like we're using right now. Increasingly, people are looking to technology as a way to bridge the span, you know, the access span that we have for each other. But not only that, you know, we're seeing it internally, but we're seeing it in our programs as well. I mentioned a Micro Mentor, and that's a global platform that uses technology to connect business people with mentors so that they can grow and expand. The data is very clear on businesses that are more successful because of mentoring. The numbers are very clear on that. The use of technology around distributions, you know, until not long ago, it was still okay to use signatures. So you had a distribution of food or non-food items and so forth. And people would come up and they would just grab their pen and they would receive the goods and then they would sign for them. And now suddenly Mercy Corps, around the Mercy Corps world, we're using QR codes to do that thing, which we should have done long ago. Our industry has not embraced technology quickly enough. We're using those in so many distribution sites, which is a great thing, which allows so many other things to be possible if you have that technology in place. The expansion of financial inclusion, as I mentioned, through the use of cash and so forth, is an exciting thing that embraces technology. And then finally, the engagement of youth globally. We've known for so long that this youth bulge, the number of young people in the world, is bigger than it's ever been, and it's growing exponentially. And yet there aren't enough jobs. Those young people don't have the right skills, and so forth. It may be that this crisis is a way to engage them that we haven't before, and I think that's very powerful. We're seeing in so many of our programs, some of the examples I gave you, and many others, of where young people are going to be central to helping these communities to navigate this global crisis. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot more I could say, but I know I'm already over time. But thank you so much, and I would love any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns. Lay it on me.
Great, thank you, Craig. Just a reminder to everyone that's signed in, go ahead and put any questions in the Q&A in the bottom. We'll get through them. We've got some really good ones coming in so far. Craig, first off, can you talk a little bit about how the camps, particularly in Jordan, are doing, refugee camps at large, but you know, Mercy Corps has such long-term investments in these vulnerable populations and how they're faring in the face of COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question. You worry about those places where you have population densities by design. Camps are one of the places we are all very, very worried about. Appropriately, government in a place, I'll use Zatri camp as an example, a place in Jordan, just over the border from Syria, about 60, 70,000 people there. I was there a couple of months ago. Travel in and out of Zatri is very restricted, appropriately. That's a good thing to do, because it's keeping those communities safe. And unfortunately, you know, if and when the virus gets in there, it would spread very quickly because those folks are tightly packed in that place. The downside of that, of course, is that there's no opportunity for those community members, those camp members, to get outside and look for economic opportunities and so forth. So in most of those kinds of places, we're seeing pretty restricted travel, informal camps. In informal camps, we're not, and that's where we're focusing on things like health messaging, things like water, sanitation, and hygiene, those kinds of messages to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help keep community members safe.
Great, thank you, Craig. Another couple questions actually around signposts. I think there's some excitement around that. Can you talk a little bit more about how broadly we're using concepts around the world? And we know it's being deployed in several locations and what partners we're working with.
Yeah.
On that.
Yeah. So we've worked with Google on that, and we've worked with a couple of other colleague agencies on that, particularly around the refugee crisis, so that we can get broad acceptance and trust. The important thing there is there's a lot of information out there. You don't know the source, but in so many of the places where we work, when you put the Mercy Corps name on it, people know that we're outside, we're not government, and we're another international source of information, so they trust the information. So we've worked closely with tech partners, we work closely with other agencies and the tech providers in those countries to make sure that we have tools like Signpost available in places where they're needed most. We're rolling that out in some other places in the world. Frankly, we need to accelerate that because it's a great tool, it's pretty basic, and it doesn't cost a lot to do it necessarily, but it's a great source of information. And in the refugee crisis, as we saw, it was fundamentally critical for helping refugees to navigate. Imagine that they show up in a place like Turkey, they don't know where they are, they have no idea what to do next, and there's a sign which leads them to that, and they have it in their language, access to information where they know to get healthcare, food, information for housing, and so forth.
Great, thank you, Craig. Next question coming in kind of around restricted resources. We know in so many places Mercy Corps works, the conflict is arising because of the restricted access to resources. Can you talk about how we're addressing the rise of this conflict, both in the face of COVID and in the long run?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one of those questions that is one that I would love to have a long conversation about it, because we look at those questions of access to resources in many different ways. There's the governance piece to it, meaning in this case, meaning government. What is the government's role in either restricting or allowing access to those resources? And what can we do as an organization to mobilize communities so they have the wherewithal and the tools to approach government and to help loosen that up? That's such an important piece of governance, and one of the skills that we can transfer to the communities that we work. Then there's the question of, are those resources even available? Are they even there? And in the case of food security, we talk about availability, we talk about access, and we talk about utilization. In some cases, that food is not even available. In those cases, we have to bring it in, we have to source it from somewhere else. In some places, the food is there, but community members don't have access to it because they can't logistically get access to it, or they don't have the money. And then utilization is the question of, bless you. And then utilization is the question of, are they using that food and those resources correctly so that they can be as healthy as possible? So those are different ways that we look at that question of access to resources. And I know that's complicated, but it's one that I love that question because it's one that we struggle with and work with in almost every place we work in the world. It's critically important. Mercy Corps has our vision for change, we call it. And basically, it's a theory of change. And our belief is that when you bring the power of the private sector together with civil society, together with government, when you bring those three pieces together, you can bring about transformational change. Where you can't do that, you're going to have to find another way to do it, and it's very difficult. So those are a few thoughts on that really important question.
Thanks. Next question, well, kind of on a similar thing around food and food insecurity. We know many places we're working are extremely food insecure right now. How is COVID impacting our ability to deliver food? And can you talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of kind of actually delivering food aid right now?
Well, I'll give you a very explicit example. Yesterday in the news, there was this story about, there was even a picture of the president of Uganda, president of Kenya, and the president of Rwanda on the phone together, talking about how can we work together to allow trucks to travel from one country to the next, so they're distributing goods and services along that way. And they agreed to test truck drivers at each border, and they were going to allow them to do this, and they've set up this system so that that kind of thing is possible. That's exactly the kind of partnership and coordination that has to happen if we're going to navigate our way through this. Mercy Corps has a big role to play in many places where those resources are not available, or as I said, the sort of, access utilization, those questions around food security. We have a huge role to play in many places where the food just isn't there. And then we logistically have to work out how the ports work, how trucks work, very, very complicated thing. So what we do in each place where there's food insecurity is we do a deep analysis of what's at the root of that challenge. Is there something we can do? I mentioned Agrifin before. We're doing that because there is a density of farmers in those places, and they have good soil and they have access to ag inputs. Let's help them be more productive. That's the solution in a place like that. Other places where you don't have that, another solution is possible. So we do that deep analysis in each place so we understand the specific dynamics at play that are causing the food security in those places, and then try to address that thing. So each response is bespoke, dependent upon what's necessary in that place, which adds to the complexity but makes it interesting.
Great, thank you, Craig. Question around earlier, you talked a little bit on, when you were talking about some of the innovative approaches, you talked about our focus on cash and getting cash in the hands of people to make the best decisions for themselves. Can you talk a little bit just broadly why cash is so important to, why Mercy Corps sees cash is so important to financial inclusion to the world's most vulnerable?
Yeah, that's a great question. Years ago, organizations, I'll give you a personal, I'll tell you a quick personal story from my time in Indonesia around the Indian Ocean tsunami that happened. At that time, this massive, in Aceh, this is on the island of Sumatra, way up in the northwest corner of the island. 200,000 people lost their lives in 15 minutes. Just dramatic. Markets wiped out, everything wiped out. A traditional government and NGO response previously was come in, bring food, begin doing distributions of food and so forth. But Indonesia is, and frankly, most of the world is very entrepreneurial. There is food nearby. And if you stimulate the market will respond. So we asked ourselves, what if we didn't do a big food distribution program there? What if we did cash for work? For example, we said to community members, you tell us what you need to do to get your community back on its feet, clean up the community center, fix the mosque, fix the school, do whatever, and we'll pay you to do it. And so we did this big program up there that did that put cash in the hands of people. And I'm telling you, fast, we saw markets spring back up. We saw goods for sale. We saw fruits and vegetables back in the marketplace very quickly, even if they were just little ad hoc, little stalls that people put together. But where there's a demand, the market will appear. And so because Mercy Corps believes in the power of markets as an organization, cash is a natural tool for us to use. Instead of us being a player in the marketplace, let's use the marketplace itself and let's stimulate that marketplace to respond and get back on its feet. So that's philosophically the grounding of why we use cash. Since that time, it's become more sophisticated, and we see that through cash transfers that are done digitally, for example, that can allow you to do things like giving people a financial identity, a digital identity they didn't have before. You can establish savings accounts, you can have a wallet, you can have all those kinds of things. So you begin to address, through initially this use of cash, you begin to address this bigger question of financial inclusion. So that's a quick one on our philosophy on the use of cash.
Great, you really teed up the next question quite well. Talking around Mercy Corps' belief in the power of markets in the private sector and the sustainability of that. Can you talk a little bit on how some of Mercy Corps' venture companies from the venture fund are responding in this time? Several of the investments that we invested in the case of Agrifin, I'll use that as an example.
One of those is a Kenya-based organization that develops a learning platform on a mobile device. So it helps make it easy for farmers to learn about, changes in planting seasons or changes to ag inputs such as seeds and fertilizer and those kinds of things. And they put together tutorials on any subject that are appropriate in a specific language for smallholder farmers on a mobile device. We're now expanding, that company is expanding to other countries and even looking at other continents in ways to, expand that kind of learning and use that as a tool. That's obviously going to be essential to our ability to do what we need to do around COVID as well. So that's just one example of several different investments that we have made over the years that are going to be so relevant to turning the corner on COVID.
Great, thank you, Craig. That was extremely helpful. And it looks like we're kind of come up on time here, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap that up. I want to really thank you, Craig, for your time. I know you're incredibly busy and on calls at just about every hour of every time zone around the world right now. So we thank you for your time this morning. And
my pleasure.
Again, a huge thank you to everyone that joined us this morning and your support of the work. So much needs done, but so much is happening because of you, and we're just so appreciative to be in this work with you all. And as we go out, we'll just hope everyone continues to stay safe and healthy, and we'll, I'm sure, hopefully talk to you all again soon. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks again, Craig.
Thanks, everybody.